Chapter 5. The next morning, Balashi was up with the sun and spent hours grooming his beard and moustache, cleaning his face and rubbing the dust out of his tunic as best he could. He made Ammon watch as he struck various poses, then asked for feedback as to which pose looked the most aggressive, which most responsible, and so on. Ammon humoured him as best he could, but was relieved when they finally left to return to the temple. Apparently, all of the serious contracts were witnessed at the temple by a priest or priestess. They charged a fee for this service, and served as witnesses in case the contract was breached. Mazizi met them at the steps of the temple, and led Balashi to the private rooms where he and Balashi had met previously. The chief steward was supposed to arrive shortly. Ammon was once more left to his own devices. He noticed that at the wing he had seen yesterday, with the heavy curtain pulled across the entrance, there was a line of men waiting just outside. Newcomers paid a ball of grain to one of the guards, who disappeared behind the curtain for a moment. Then, every few minutes, a smiling priestess came outside the curtain and beckoned the next man in line forward. Curious, Ammon wandered over to see what this was all about. There was a pair of statues flanking the curtains on either side. Ammon tried to figure out what the statues represented, reasoning that the business contracted behind the curtain was likely to be connected to the statues somehow. He turned his head first this way, then that, but he could make neither heads nor tails of the thing. It seemed like some mythical beast with 2 heads and 8 limbs, but the limbs jutted out at such odd angles that it would have been nearly impossible for the thing to move, much less walk. Then, all at once, the statue resolved itself in his mind, and Ammon blushed fiercely. Were human beings really capable of contorting their bodies like that? Just then, the curtain parted, and the woman from the Pool of Inanna appeared, striding determinedly on some errand. She didn't notice Ammon until she nearly ran into him. Her face began to scowl, but melted into a pleased smile as she recognized him. "Oh, hello, little brother," she said pleasantly. "Here to visit us at the temple again today, I see." "Hello, sister," he replied, with real warmth. "I did not think to have the great good fortune to see you here again today." "Oh?" she asked. "You seem to have been so intent on our artwork that I'm surprised you noticed me at all." Ammon's cheeks turned red, but he kept his cool. "Say something clever," he urged himself. "No man could fail to notice you, though the goddess Inanna herself, bedecked in her full splendor, stood here surrounded by 1,000 demons. That was pretty good," he congratulated himself. "You are very bold to blaspheme here in Inanna's own house," she chided, though a small smile betrayed her amusement at his chutzpah. "Fate favors the bold," Ammon thought. "Surely great Inanna is far beyond petty jealousies," he said. For nothing else could explain how she could stand to allow a creature of such surpassing beauty to roam the halls of her temple. The priestess actually blushed at that. "Oh, you are a silver-tongued rogue," she admitted. "But it is clear that you are no worshipper of Inanna. What, then, brings you to the temple today?" Ammon could tell by her somewhat distracted air that she was eager to be off on whatever errand had brought her barreling through the curtain. So, he decided to take one further chance. "What brought me here is unimportant," he said. "But I can see that you're in a hurry. Please, allow me to accompany you wherever it is that you're going." "Because it is clear that you and that silver tongue of yours shouldn't be left unsupervised, I will allow you to accompany me as far as the Pool of Inanna," she told him. As they walked, she asked, "Where did you get the idea that it is safe to risk the wrath of the goddess by mocking her in her seat of power?" "I truly meant no disrespect, my lady," he replied. "I simply lack the proper vocabulary to describe what my eyes see, and so I must resort to comparisons with the divine to describe you." "Who taught you to speak so smoothly?" she asked. "You are as bold as brass with your flattery." Ammon considered. "I suppose my boldness comes from my father. He was ever one to say exactly what he thought, but my mother was one who loved clever words and a sharp tongue. She used to spar with me for hours at a time, challenging me to come up with a subtler insult, a more charming compliment." "You speak of them in the past tense," she said carefully. "Does that mean you have neither mother nor father?" Ammon paused a moment and drew a breath, but the expected pressure on his heart did not come. "They were taken from me prematurely," he said. "How horrible for you," she said sincerely. "I too lost my parents. It is an emptiness that never seems to be filled. Ammon only nodded, afraid that if he said more, the squeezing feeling would come. They walked for a few steps in silence. As the pool of Inanna approached, Ammon sought to change the subject to something more cheerful. Was this pool created by Enki from the waters of the great deep? The priestess turned to him in mild surprise. Why would you say that? She asked. Who doesn't know the story of Enki and Inanna in the sacred May? He replied. And does that story include Enki creating a pool for Inanna from the waters of the great deep? Ammon stopped to think. Was the story of the pool part of the story the commoners told, or part of the secret knowledge shared with him by his father? He couldn't recall, so he improvised. The pool seems so deep, much deeper than a normal well, so I assumed that Enki, Lord of the Deep, had created it when he and Inanna reconciled after she brought the May here to Uruk. Clearly, you are not from this town, the priestess said. I had not stopped to think that in other places the stories might be told differently. In Eridu, the story is told of the magnanimous Enki sharing his gifts with his beloved consort, though he plays an intricate game with her of trickery and flight. How strange, the priestess said. We tell it differently here. The priestess fidgeted, and Ammon could tell that it was time for him to make his exit. I fear that I must take my leave of you, however reluctantly, my lady, he said. I hope that you will decide to visit us here again soon, she told him. As it so happens, I have business here at the temple again tomorrow, he replied. He let the implicit suggestion that he would like to see her again the next day remain unsaid. The priestess regarded him and tapped her chin with her forefinger. If I agree to see you once more tomorrow, briefly, she said, will you promise to say nothing more which might incite Inanna to turn you into a toad or blast you with lightning? I swear by Enki that I will never again say that you are a goddess, he swore. Then he added, would it be all right if I compare you to a flower or perhaps a beautiful sunset? The priestess laughed. As long as you don't blaspheme, I suppose it would be unkind of me to forbid you to give free rein to your creative genius. Indeed it would, he agreed. Wait for me by the pool about lunchtime tomorrow, she said. Then, with a smile, she turned and walked quickly away. Ammon sat on the edge of the pool and tried to think of clever things he could say when he saw the beautiful priestess again. What if he composed a sonnet, comparing her beauty to that of a rare desert flower? Girls liked things like that, didn't they? He was sure he could come up with something really clever that would rhyme with her name. Except he didn't know her name. That brought him up short. He couldn't refer to her as his sister in a sonnet. That wouldn't be romantic at all. Maybe he could refer to her as the mysterious handmaiden of Inanna, or something like that. This was going to be harder than he thought. Sometime later, a beaming Balashi appeared. I will join Urnungal's personal guard tomorrow, he said. And tonight we have been invited to feast with Mizizi and his family. Congratulations, Ammon said distractedly. He was still trying to come up with a good rhyme for mysterious. Delirious, maybe? That was good. He could say that her brief visits left him delirious. Balashi was going on about how his new job would help them establish themselves in Uruk. Ammon didn't think that getting a position with some minor, unimportant lord in Uruk was occasion for celebration, but he supposed that he ought to be happy for his bodyguard. So he mentally set his poem aside for a moment and asked Balashi for a few details before turning back to the problem of selecting the proper flower to compare to the priestess. He hoped that the feast with Mizizi would be diverting enough to keep him from counting the hours before he could return to the temple. And of course, leaving behind the flea-infested inn where they had been staying would be a great relief too. Ammon resolved that he would visit the fuller for his clothes and have a thorough bath before going to their new lodgings. As Ammon strolled to the temple the next morning, he paid no attention at all to his surroundings, preferring instead to concentrate on inventing clever things that he might say in this situation or that. He had left the city early that morning and picked dozens of different wildflowers which grew in the fields and the rocky hills just to the north. He had found an excellent patch of white primrose that had just come into bloom. He had passed a few minutes of tortured indecision as he had to face the decision between modifying his poem, since the night before he had settled on comparing the priestess to a pink orchid and replacing it with a primrose would ruin the whole rhyming scheme of his second couplet, or else giving up on his plan to take her a gift of flowers altogether, since he hadn't been able to find any orchids at all, whether pink or otherwise. In the end, he hit upon a brilliant solution when he realized that he didn't have to find a rhyme for primrose, but that he could just call it a rose, and then go on to rhapsodize about the perfection of her beautiful nose. Satisfied, he picked a dozen of the white flowers and hurried back to Uruk, worried that his indecision had taken too much time, and that he might ruin everything by missing his lunchtime rendezvous. In the event, he needn't have worried. He arrived long before midday, and passed the time as he waited in plaiting the stems of the wildflowers into a crown, such as those worn by the unmarried girls of Eridu in the Spring Fertility Festival. He was not particularly skilled at weaving the flowers, but as he sat there beside the pool of Inanna, he had plenty of time to try and try again. The sun slowly climbed higher and higher in the sky, reaching its apogee and then beginning to descend once more. When it was far past midday and nearing evening, and his stomach was complaining that he had not properly filled it all day, he was, at last, forced to admit to himself that she was not coming. But even so, he could not bring himself to leave. He kept imagining that she would arrive just after he left, some urgent task having arisen unexpectedly that kept her away, despite her doing her utmost to finish quickly and rush to see him. It finally took a stony-faced temple guard brandishing his club right beneath Ammon's nose to force him to give up and leave, the gates of the temple making an ominous boom behind him as they were locked for the night. Ammon was too wrapped up in his own feelings, caught halfway between the miserable certainty that the girl had spurned him and the thin hope that there was some plausible explanation for her absence, to notice the quickly darkening sky and emptying streets of the city. He let his feet carry him where they would, but when he finally looked up in confusion, he realized that he had no idea where he was, and the light was all but gone from the sky. He made his way back toward where he thought he had made the wrong turn, but all the city looked equally unfamiliar, and he had not been in Uruk long enough to develop a sense of direction inside its walls. The first twinges of panic began to worm their way into his heart when the final streaks of dying light faded from the sky. Eridu was not a closed city like Uruk. It had no wall, so it was easy to take note of the few elevated landmarks that rose above the floodplain and orient yourself by them. In Uruk, there was nothing but the looming city walls, which looked exactly the same in every direction. Ammon knew that even holy Eridu was a very dangerous place after dark. The palace guard was frequently called upon to drag dead bodies found in the streets of the city to the graves of the unknown. A city as large and cosmopolitan as Uruk must surely be far more dangerous. With a growing sense of desperation, Ammon rushed first this way and then that, peering around corners and hurrying past alleyways, looking for anything that might give him a clue as to where he was and how to make his way back home. He had just turned onto his 10th unfamiliar street when he forced himself to stop his frantic search and instead calm down and think. Their new lodgings were near the north gate, not far from the wall. If he just went to the wall and followed it around, he would eventually get to the north gate, and he would find his way from there. Also, near the wall there would be soldiers on watch, so he should be at least marginally safer from the city's nocturnal predators. Ammon took a deep breath, searched the skyline for the nearest piece of wall, and then headed for it. He got as close as he could to the city wall, put it on his right side, and began walking. As he walked, he periodically passed torches high on the wall, where the night watch paced back and forth. He had passed 4 separate torches when he located the north gate, where there was a guardhouse and a garrison. Inside the garrison, the torches burned brightly, and created an island of golden light in the dark night. Heartened by having found his way, and having seen the watchful soldiers guarding the gate, he hurried his step to a jog, and turned toward the heart of the city. He was perhaps 3 or 4 streets away from the new apartment when he became certain that the echoing footsteps he had just heard for the 3rd time were made by someone paralleling his path. He couldn't tell if it was a lone man or a group, but he couldn't give them the time to set up an ambush. Without a word, he accelerated to a full run, legs and arms pumping as fast as he could move them. The city streets here were uneven and muddy, and he stumbled several times. Each stumble increased his determination to run harder to make up for the brief pause. He tried not to think what would happen if he reached the door to the apartment courtyard and found it barred for the night. He heard ragged breaths coming hard and close from his right side when he made a sharp left turn and sprinted for all he was worth for the apartment. He was surprised to see a torch moving in the road near the gate. When he entered the circle of light, he saw that it was Balashi, a bronze dagger in hand and a worried expression on his face. Ammon sprinted past Balashi to the open gate and gasped out, "Beware!" Balashi tensed and reacted immediately when one of Ammon's pursuers came skittering to a stop in front of him with a wicked knife in his hand. Balashi struck before the man had regained his balance, and with a cry of pain, the fellow dropped the knife and fled with a copiously bleeding gash on his arm. Another would-be assailant shied back from the torchlight and silently disappeared into the night. Balashi stepped back through the gate of the courtyard and slammed the door shut with a bang. Ammon was bent over with his hands on his knees, gasping for breath. "Anu, Elil, Ishtar, and all of the gods," Balashi swore. "Where have you been?" I got lost," Ammon panted. "You got lost for the entire day?" Balashi demanded. Ammon held up his hand to ask for some breathing space. When he finally caught his breath sufficiently, he gave Balashi a story about wandering around the temple to try to gather information about the politics of the city. Then he explained how he had left late and mistaken the path home. Balashi ranted and raged about how worried he had been, how he had no idea where Ammon could be, and so he could do nothing better than to light a borrowed torch and hope that somehow it might help Ammon find his way home. Ammon let him rage, recognizing that his anger was due primarily to worry for his well-being. He could tell that the edge of Balashi's anger had been dulled when he shook his head and said, "You truly are Ur-Ma-Ug. You think you're going about harvesting lion hearts, but you nearly let a pair of poxy beggars turn you into a skeleton." "Bah," Ammon replied. "You know nothing of the methods of Ur-Ma-Ug. If you are to be my acolyte, as you so clearly desire, you must start by making sure that you can run faster than any lion or poxy beggar which might take it into his head to chase you." Balashi bit his lip to try to hold in both his mirth and the anger he wasn't ready to let go just yet, but he lost the battle and released a great guffaw. "You were barely a step ahead of a half-lame man with a twisted foot," Balashi pointed out. "If I were you, I wouldn't go purchasing any lions for your domestic herd just yet." "If I start with half-lame beggars, then before you know it, I'll be running away from moonstruck girls, and then perhaps I'll flee from a pair of wounded soldiers. It's all part of the master plan of Ur-Ma-Ug to become the mightiest hero the world has ever known," Ammon said, deadpan. He did not earn the belly laughs he had been hoping for, but Balashi did shake his head and let the matter drop. This gave Ammon the chance to propose his penance for getting lost and making Balashi worry. "I'll begin tomorrow to learn all of the streets of the city, beginning with those closest to our new home. Within a month, I will know all the streets and will never get lost again," he proposed. Balashi led Ammon back to their apartment and threw himself down among the reclining pillows on the floor. "I suppose it would be no more foolish to waste your time with that than to spend your days in the temple listening to idle gossip," Balashi allowed. He lay among the pillows and looked at Ammon speculatively. "Will you not consider taking service with some lord?" Balashi asked. "I don't like you wandering about the city unattended, with only your imagination to guide you in how to use your time." "No," Ammon replied shortly. "If I take service to some lord, I'll be trapped. The years will go by and I will never return to Eridu. No, I need to learn as much as I can about the currents of power in this city. I need my face to be seen and known among the powerful, and I need to learn how to sway them to my cause." Balashi clicked his tongue. "Do what you will, but it is a dangerous game you propose to play. No man will come to you for kindness' sake. They will seek to use you as a piece in the games they play, and the games of the powerful are often deadly." "If they can use me, then I can use them back," Ammon replied. "I am the beloved of Enki, and Enki will make my pathway clear before me." Balashi shook his head, but he did not argue. Nor did he bring up Ammon's previous conviction that Enki had abandoned him. Let the boy waste his time as he would. Despite his youthful face, he was a man grown, and old enough to be making his own decisions, even if they were stupid and would likely get him killed.